Right then, a few weeks ago, Poco finally showed off the M5 and the M5s, its two newest phones in the M series. And even though they have similar names and specs, the M5s is different enough from its brother and a lot of other budget phones for that matter by doing a few things differently. So in comparison to the M5, the M5s has a more premium overall feel. The fake leather back and matte sides have been replaced with the smooth matte plastic back, a shiny fake metal plastic frame, and a camera module that kind of screams Redmi Note 10s, but actually says Poco. It's a rebranded phone. Now, like the M5s has a fingerprint reader built into the power button on the side. It is nice and accurate, but it's a bit slower than the power button fingerprint reader on the Asus Zenfone 9, for example. There's also an infrared blaster and headphones port, but unlike the M5's single speaker, the M5s has dual speakers on the top and bottom. They don't get very loud, but at least they don't sound like tin cans. So overall, it's a good design that works well. It's easy to use and doesn't feel like too cheap, and it does have an IP53 splash resistance rating, which is a nice extra and, better than nothing, I suppose. It's got a 6.4-inch Full HD plus 60Hz AMOLED display with a hole punch selfie camera. Now, unfortunately, this phone doesn't have a refresh rate of 90 Hz or 120 Hz like the LCD display on the M5, but the AMOLED panel gives you better color vibrancy and contrast, so games and videos look great. Plus, it's got the anti-flicker mode, otherwise known as DC dimming, which might be important to some folks. The M5s runs on Android 12 with MIUI 13, which means you'll have a handful of Xiaomi software features and apps, so depending on your individual tastes, this may or may not be a deal breaker for you. Now, with that said, if you do enjoy a little bit of personalization on your phone, you'll probably find a few things here and there that you'll appreciate with MIUI 13. So the M5s I have here has a MediaTek Helio G95 chip, 6 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of storage, and a SIM tray that supports micro SD cards. And even though this phone doesn't have a display with a refresh rate higher than 60 Hz, it still seems to perform well enough with only like a few hiccups and stutters here and there. But when it comes to playing games, the M5s is about as good as most other budget phones, so don't expect like super smooth gameplay since the G95 is still a chipset for like mid-range and entry-level phones and is sort of in between the Snapdragon 720G and 730G, to give you a bit of an example. Now, that's not to say it's bad, it'll absolutely be able to play the majority of games on the Play Store, but I'd recommend tempering your expectations in terms of performance, since you won't be able to play high resource games at peak graphics without some like fairly significant frame drops as a trade-off. Now, the M5s should have a bit better camera performance and image quality compared to the M5. Like on the front, there's a 13 megapixel selfie camera, right in the middle of the screen, of course. On the back, there's a 64 megapixel main shooter and 8 megapixel ultra wide, along with 2 megapixel macro and depth sensors, but I'm not gonna talk about those silly things. And images are actually pretty decent. Colors look good, contrast and details are pretty good, but dynamic range is lacking though, with very little detail in the shadows, and highlights get clipped a lot too. But for an under $300 phone, not bad at all. The selfie camera, on the other hand, not great. Skin tones are far from natural, and again, shadows are crushed with highlights getting clipped like you're pointing a flashlight at the lens. Now, we do get 4K video at 30 FPS from the rear camera, which looks all right, but the electronic image stabilization looks like a crackhead's holding it while running from the cops. It's really bad. The M5s is fueled by a big 5,000 mAh battery, which should be more than enough for most people to last a whole day and gives me about 8 hours of screen on time. There's also support for 33-watt charging, which means that the M5s can charge faster than a lot of other budget phones out there, and actually even faster than the M5. Sadly, there's no wireless charging, but I think that's to be expected at this price point. So, at roughly 225 euros or around 227 USD for the top spec model, the Poco M5s comes with some decent features like that large battery, AMOLED display, and the ultra-wide camera. But while there are some drawbacks to consider, like the low refresh rate display and absence of 5G, there is obviously a big demographic of people shopping for an affordable, straightforward, but capable phone, and I think this sort of falls in that category. Anyways, that's gonna do it for this one. Big thanks as always for watching, and I'll talk to you on the next one. Cheers.